internationally recognized foreign minister of Russia, pointing a finger at Washington, D.C. and the West as the prime motivators for this war. And then he uses this odd phrase, which you and I have discussed off air. He said, it's not a hybrid war, it's a war. What does he mean by hybrid war? What does this phrase mean?
This particular term was coined or invented by a former Marine major named Frank Hoffman. Very nice fellow. And I think it was really designed to somehow or another give the Marines justification for lots of Marine infantrymen to fight in future insurgencies. And what he was trying to talk about was today hybrid war consists of men with rifles on the ground, media, external factors, other players in the international arena, game-changing weapons, all of this instead of what we normally think of war as a more conventional confrontation with armies and air forces and so forth. And what Lavrov said, let's throw this hybrid nonsense out. We're talking about a real war. He's talking about high-end conventional warfare. It's not talking about nuclear warfare, but high-end conventional warfare. That's everything up to but not including nuclear weapons. And he's saying this is being planned against us. That's a fair conclusion on his part based upon what you see us doing, trying desperately to provide enough support to the Ukrainians. Remember, our support goes beyond technology, goes beyond weapon systems and ammunition. It's information warfare. We control the information highways. We are proselytizing for war against Russia. We are depicting Russia as this evil state, this nationalist state that rests on the foundation of Russian Orthodox Christianity. It protects its borders. It has an identity. Ergo, it must be destroyed. It must become like Western Europe and the United States, a country without borders, a country with identities that are being washed away in seas of illegal human trafficking, drug abuse, and so forth. That's what's at stake in their minds, and it's not an unreasonable assumption based upon what we're seeing. And he's saying, look, we're going to fight. And that's what we need to understand. They're not kidding, and we're not prepared for an all-out war. But
are the people in Washington who now are manifesting a change in mind aware of the defiance and forcefulness with which these kinds of statements out of the mouth of Mr. Lavrov have been made? And are they prepared to counter it by sitting down and talking to him? Do they think they're going to counter it militarily? And do they not realize that that's World War III if they do?
Well, first of all, I think it's very clear that under no circumstances are they going to hold talks with the Russians, because that would suggest that they've made a mistake.
Right. It would suggest that we're pulling the Zelensky strings, which of course we are.
Yeah. So it's not, I don't see us doing that. I was asked the other day by a journalist, what do you think we should do? I said, hold talks immediately without preconditions. We need to come to some sort of resolution no matter what. That in fact, was essentially what Kissinger said a few months ago, and then, of course, changed his tune. We're not going to do that. That's an admission of failure. No one in Washington ever admits that they failed at anything. Everything's a success no matter how many times you fail. That's the first problem. I think the second problem is there's a lot of arrogance and self-delusion. I don't think the people on the Hill really understand what war means anymore. For many, many years, we had lots of interesting people on the Hill. Sam Nunn was a good example, but there were many others. Most of them had served in the military. A lot of them lived through the Second World War. They understood what you meant when you started talking about war. So when it came to Russia, or in those days the Soviet Union, people made it very clear that's not what we want. Whatever we do, we must find a way around that, because we all know what that means. And they weren't necessarily saying it would be nuclear, but it would be so destructive and self-defeating, we don't want to engage in it. I don't sense that anymore.
What is your understanding of the latest numbers of military killed? Ukraine, Russia.
Well, Judge, first of all, this goes back to the fiction that we've been spinning about the war. We haven't told the truth about Ukrainian losses. It's becoming harder and harder to accept. We know from obituaries, we know from people on the ground in the hospitals treating the wounded, We know from the Ukrainians themselves who are posting things, comments on Telegram and sending videos, Ukrainians have lost easily 122,000, with absolute certainty, men killed on the battlefield. Secondly, they've admitted to roughly 35,000 missing in action, presumed dead. And if you go back to World War II and you look at German fatalities, there were almost 2 million casualties or dead, frankly, from the Second World War in Eastern Europe and the German Wehrmacht. And a substantial chunk of that, hundreds of thousands, were missing in action, presumed dead. They were never recovered. We have to understand that the majority of casualties being inflicted on the Ukrainians is a consequence of artillery fire, not just hard shell artillery, rocket fire, firing thermobaric warheads. These are the fuel air explosives that utterly destroy a whole area. This is how you avoid going into buildings where there may be people waiting for you. You fire a thermobaric warhead into the building, it eliminates the oxygen. It's destructive, but it kills everything because there's nothing to breathe. You have a whole range of these kinds of explosives. The Russians have great quantities of them. They use them very effectively because they are also linking these in real time to overhead surveillance. This is surveillance, reconnaissance, intelligence platforms. So you're getting within seconds sometimes, certainly within a minute or two, accurate data to the artillery systems that can then fire. Keep in mind that the Russians can fire up to roughly 60,000 rounds a day. The Ukrainians are lucky to get off 6,000 or 7,000 rounds a day. In other words, tenfold more than the Ukrainians can fire in response.
Can you address the, you've indicated 122,000 dead, 35,000 unaccounted for, probably dead Ukrainian. What do your sources tell you is the number of dead or missing and unaccounted for on the Russian side?
What we're getting from the Russians, as well as from some, the Ukrainian sources are just, unfortunately, when it comes to the Russians, they're just not believable. But we are hearing from people on the battlefield, depending upon where you are and who you talk to, the Russians have had somewhere between 16,000, 17,000 and 25,000 killed, and perhaps another 25, 30, 40,000 wounded. And people say, well, how could that be? I just explained it to you. You have overmatch in firepower on a dramatic scale, on a strategic scale. That's why.
When will the globalists in Western Europe and in the State Department and the Defense Department come to the same realization that the political class in Washington has begun to achieve, that this is a losing fight and we have to change the mission?
Thus far, I haven't seen any evidence that there's any recognition of this. In fact, I continue to hear these disturbing comments that, well, if the Ukrainians have to fall back to the Polish border, then we'll fight a perpetual war against the Russians.
So this crazy president of Poland is going to send 100,000 Polish troops east over the border and is going to beg Joe Biden to let the 101st Airborne join them?
Well, I don't think he has to beg. I think there are lots of people that would push for that. And remember, you've got at least the equivalent of 3 armor brigades from the United States on the ground in Poland and down in Romania, plus the 101st, plus other units, formations, artillery, and so forth. Then you have the Poles, as you point out. They've now mobilized at least 200,000. They're trying to build up a force of over 300,000. That would probably support the projection of somewhere between 60 and 100,000 troops on the ground. I don't know about the Romanians, exactly how the government thinks, but the Polish population, and this is very important. We also discussed this map of Europe that shows the various polling data. And what you get all across Europe from the publics is a very definite preference for a negotiated solution to this war as soon as possible. There is no evidence that anybody in Europe wants to go to war with Russia. And I'm beginning to see that happen in Poland, where more and more Poles are saying, wait a minute, we're literally on the edge of the abyss here. If this war spreads, we will be destroyed.
Doesn't the German public want inexpensive Russian natural gas back in their homes to heat them for the winter?
I'm sure some do, but not yet. I think there's this belief that somehow or another they can get past this tough winter and be ready next year with their alternative energy sources. This climate change business is more than a program. It's a religious faith in much of Europe, and particularly with the Germans and Scandinavians. It's quite strange. And real data don't make any difference anymore. Again, everything connected with this war is emotion.
All right. I'm going to assume, or I want you to assume, that everything you've just educated us on is known by Russian intel and is known by President Putin. Does he come in with this slam bang invasion of 300 to 500,000 soldiers and finish everything off, or does he let the Ukrainians just sort of die on the vine?
I think he knows that he can't do the latter, because we will constantly try to resuscitate the corpse, no matter how bad it gets. We will rush in there, put it back on life support, try to get it back up on its feet and fight. I think he knows that the only way to rid Ukraine of this Ukrainian armed force is to go in and destroy it, and ultimately to replace his regime with something else, or wait for something else to emerge. I don't think he feels anymore, or for that matter, any of the Russians, they can trust anything we say. They know they can no longer trust the Europeans. They used to trust the Germans, and they actually, I think, believed Macron at one point in time. Now they know they can't trust anybody. I don't see great enthusiasm for a long and destructive war in Ukraine. Why would they be enthusiastic about that? Why do they want to kill other Slavic Orthodox Christians? I don't think they do. But the point is, they don't have much choice. And I think they will press ahead. The question is when. And I told you I thought that the major offensives would begin sometime between the 21st of January and the 7th of February. We'll see if I'm right. There are others that say, oh, no, they're going to wait until March. I don't know. But I think it's coming sooner rather than later because of the things that you're pointing out. You know, why should they sit around and wait for resuscitation again? Why not just go in and put this thing out of its misery? But it's not going to be a lightning blitzkrieg. That's all nonsense. Warfare has changed. They have over Ukraine this large umbrella of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance assets, and then they have this wide range of strike assets. Everything from rocket artillery to jets to tactical ballistic missiles to long-range artillery. All of this is linked, and they're going to move their ground forces under this umbrella. They're not going to be surprised. Anything out there that looks like it could threaten their forces will be identified and struck quickly and put out of business as they move.